You ever carry a grudge so long it starts whispering to you in your sleep? Elliot Reed had, and today he was done whispering back. The courtroom buzzed like a beehive set on fire. It was one of those April mornings where the sky forgot it was supposed to be blue, gray, humid, like something big was about to pop. Cameras lined the aisles, reporters packed into the back like it was a murder trial instead of a civil suit. And Elliot, civil rights attorney, 30-something with a jawline sharp enough to cut the tension, stood at the center of the chaos. Dressed in an ash-gray tailored suit, he looked like a man out for revenge, but the kind that shows up with a legal pad and a signed affidavit. Mr. Reed, to clarify, you're suing your high school teacher? The judge asked, already raising one brow like the whole thing was beneath her docket. Elliot didn't flinch. Yes, Your Honor, Miss Joan Keller, for defamation, negligence, and the deliberate sabotage of a student's future. A ripple of gasps fluttered through the room. The court clerk looked like she wanted to throw up her morning latte. Someone in the gallery whispered, "He's really doing it." And oh, he was. Flashback to 2009, senior year. Elliot had a GPA high enough to kiss Ivy League dreams, top 1% nationwide SAT scores, full ride scholarship letters already lined his mailbox. Then came final grades. Then came John Keller's red pen like a guillotine. 1F, 1 grade, 1 crushed future. That grade had been the bullet that killed his scholarship and sent him spiraling into community college, 2 jobs, and enough student debt to drown a small country. He clawed his way back. Law school, bar exam, courtroom victories stacked like poker chips. But the ghost of the F had never left. Today it was her turn to answer for it. John Keller shuffled in quietly, no lawyer in sight. Just her, hunched and small in a dated blazer, white hair pinned up like she was heading to church instead of civil war. She clutched a dusty manila folder like it was armor. When she stepped to the defendant's table, people didn't see a monster. They saw a grandma. Elliot saw the hand that had pulled the trigger on his dreams. "Miss Keller," the judge said, "do you have representation?" Joan shook her head. Her voice cracked like old wood. "No, Your Honor. I didn't think I'd need one. I didn't do anything wrong." That hit weirdly hard. Even Elliot blinked. Because here's the thing. This wasn't just revenge porn dressed in a lawsuit. This was Elliot trying to hold up the system that had failed him. And maybe, deep down, he didn't just want Keller punished. Maybe he wanted her to admit it, to look him in the eye and say, "I knew what I was doing." He stared her down across the aisle, jaw clenched, fire behind his eyes. She looked at him with something between guilt and confusion. And when she finally opened that dusty folder, the courtroom damn near stopped breathing. Inside wasn't just old gray sheets. It was letters, notes, one from the principal, one from a college rep, one typed and signed from the school board, with a name Elliot hadn't seen in years, his guidance counselor, the one who mysteriously quit halfway through senior year. "Your Honor," John said softly, "I have reason to believe I was told to fail Elliot Reed. I didn't want to, but someone higher up said it was necessary." The courtroom didn't gasp this time. It choked. Elliot froze, because justice just morphed into conspiracy. And suddenly, the lawsuit wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the system. And Elliot Reed wasn't just the plaintiff. He was the detonator. To be continued. Courtrooms are supposed to be temples of truth, right? But that morning, it felt more like a stage, and someone had just flipped the script. Joan Keller didn't raise her voice, didn't beg, didn't even look like she was sweating. With the calm of someone who knew the house was about to burn, exactly how she planned, she slid a single yellowed sheet of paper across the bench. No drama, no speech, just one damn paper. The judge picked it up like it was radioactive. "This is sealed from 2008, Joan said quietly, hands folded in front of her. "Academic Review Board, the one Elliot was never allowed to see." That hit like a gut punch. Elliot's mouth parted, but no sound came out. The courtroom felt like it had gone mute. No clicks, no whispers, just the soft crinkle of the judge unfolding that ancient document. "I want a 10-minute recess," the judge said, standing. Both counsels joined me in chambers, except there was no both. John was still riding solo. Elliot stood frozen while the judge disappeared behind that heavy wood door, file in hand, with Joan walking beside her like she'd just dropped a nuclear code in a manila folder. 10 minutes turned into 30, then 45. When the judge finally returned, her face was unreadable, but her voice was sharp enough to slice steel. "This case is dismissed," she said flatly. "The court finds no grounds to proceed." Elliot shot to his feet. "Wait, what? Your Honor, what was in the file?" The judge just shook her head. "This matter is closed." Elliot's voice cracked. "That's it? That's how it ends?" "Sometimes," the judge said, rising, "answers aren't meant to come from a courtroom." Then she was gone. No closure, no justice, no nothing. Just silence and static. And the sound of Elliot's heart slamming against his ribs like it was trying to escape. That night, his apartment felt too still. The kind of quiet that creeps under your skin and whispers you missed something. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the blank screen of his laptop. Twitter was already exploding with courtroom hashtags, his name trending alongside blurry images of him storming out of the courthouse. Everyone had an opinion. No one had the truth. Then came the knock. Not loud, not urgent. Just 2 soft taps and an envelope slipped through the mail slot. He didn't even move at first, just stared at it. Elliot finally picked it up. No stamp, no return address, just his name, scrawled in a handwriting he hadn't seen since he was 17. Inside was a single note. "If you are ready to know the truth, meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m., room 214. Signed, Joan. Elliot stared at the words like they were a riddle carved in stone. Room 214. He flipped the envelope. Nothing else, no address, no clue where. But something in his gut already knew. His old high school, the place it tried to forget, where the truth had apparently been sealed and buried. And now, after all this time, it was clawing its way back to the surface. He didn't sleep that night, just sat with the envelope on the table, eyes locked on it like it might explode. And deep down, under all the rage and confusion, he knew one thing. Tomorrow wasn't gonna be a conversation. It was going to be an exorcism. There's something about walking back into your old high school that hits like a punch to the chest. The air still smells like floor wax and bad decisions. But today, it also smelled like truth. Elliot parked across the street, engine off, heart doing 90 in a school zone. The building was half shuttered now, budget cuts and bad PR had eaten away at it like termites. Rust clung to the gate, and Westbridge High School looked like it was trying to peel itself off the bricks out of shame. Room 214 was up on the second floor, east wing, dead silent, dusty, forgotten. He pushed open the door and there she was, Joan Keller, sitting alone at a warped desk with a shoebox on her lap and a look in her eyes that said, "You ready for this storm, kid?" Elliot didn't speak, just stepped inside, let the door creak shut behind him, and waited. Joan gestured toward the second chair. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," he said, voice tight. "Thought maybe you were playing me." Joan smiled sadly. "I did, for years, but not the way you think." She placed the shoebox on the desk between them, lifted the lid. Inside, history, not the kind they put in textbooks, the kind that's hidden in the back room behind locked filing cabinets. Letters, handwritten and typed. Emails printed out with timestamps from old school accounts. A folded security incident report from February 2008. And sitting on top, like a crown of rust, a labeled VHS white ice VHS tape, 21108, cafeteria cam. Elliot stared. Joan reached in and pulled out a letter, faded and creased from time. "This," she said, "is from the principal. Dated 2 weeks before midterms, it says you were a disruption to campus order after that protest." Elliot's stomach dropped, the walkout. He remembered it clear as glass. Administration had banned the cultural showcase organized by Black Student Union. Elliot, already editor of the school paper, had published an article calling it racist. Then he grabbed a megaphone and led 40 students out the front doors during lunch. He thought the detention was the end of it. It wasn't. John handed him another document. An internal memo from the school board. They wanted you expelled, Elliot. Not for your grades, not for behavior, for insubordination and creating a racially divisive environment. She air-quoted it like it made her sick. He blinked hard. They were gonna kill my whole future over a protest? They didn't want a black kid in their Ivy League success story who made noise, she said. They wanted obedient, not excellent. John pulled out the incident report. And then there was this. Security footage from that day. You were pushed by Principal Hodge. He laid hands on you. You didn't retaliate, but they spun it like you threatened him. Elliot's jaw locked. I didn't even know that existed. They buried it, she said. The board scrubbed the report. The footage was supposed to be destroyed. But you kept it, he said, eyes falling on the VHS. John nodded. I didn't have the power to stop them, but I had enough to change the outcome. She paused, looked him dead in the eye. I failed you on purpose. The silence cracked like thunder. I knew they'd never let you graduate with honors. They'd sabotage you somehow, so I gave them something they didn't expect. A reason to get rid of you that didn't reek of racism. A failing grade from a veteran teacher. Clean, explainable. Elliot couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I thought, John continued, if you went somewhere else, you'd still rise. You'd still win. Maybe not the way you planned, but you'd survive. Tears weren't supposed to show up in moments like this, but there they were, sharp and hot behind Elliot's eyes. You ruined my life, he whispered. I saved it, she said, but I know that doesn't make it okay. They sat there, ghosts of who they used to be, staring at each other across a broken desk in a room the world forgot. The air was thick with everything unsaid. Finally, Elliot reached for the VHS tape. We need to play this. John nodded slowly. There's an old AV room still down the hall. If the TV's not dead, it should work. He stood, looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Not as the villain in his origin story, but maybe the only one who tried to throw a lifeline when everyone else let him drown. I want everything in that box, he said. You'll have it, John replied. But there's more. People you haven't thought about in years. Names you trusted, people who knew and said nothing. Elliot took a deep breath, the kind that feels like it might be your last before diving into something bigger than you. Then let's blow this thing open. The AV room smelled like damp carpet, old wires, and 2008. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like flies circling something dead. In the corner sat the kind of clunky TV VCR combo only public schools and apocalypse bunkers still kept alive. Elliot shoved the tape into the VCR. It whirred like a dying cassette player trying to remember how to breathe. Static. Then grainy black and white footage. Timestamp 11/8, 12:31 p.m. There he was, 17. Skinny. Too much fire behind the eyes. Not enough experience to know when to put it out. He was standing in the cafeteria, boys rising, surrounded by a cluster of students. No one bans the BSU showcase unless they're scared of what it represents, Teen Elliot yelled. The camera shook, kids moving, security shifting, and there, wading into the chaos like a man drunk on his own power, was Principal Hodge. Tall, pale, smug as hell. He stormed up to Elliot, finger in his face. The mic didn't pick up their words, but it didn't need to. You could see it. The shove came fast, barely a nudge, but enough. Teen Elliot staggered back a step. Didn't swing, didn't cuss, just stood there, breathing hard, locked in place while security flinched like they were about to jump him. The students around him started shouting. A teacher pulled the girl back from the edge of the crowd. Then the scene cut to a hallway. Joanne Keller. She was in the admin wing, standing in front of a long conference table. 4 school board members, Principal Hodge and the district's attorney, were seated on the other side. Her voice, though muffled, was firm, shaking but unbroken. Punishing him for speaking out is not just unethical, it's illegal. You're not here to set policy, Hodge snapped. You're here to teach English. He's my student, John countered, and I will not fail him for something he didn't do. The board chair leaned forward. Then you might be teaching somewhere else come fall. John sat back, tight-lipped. She was cornered, and she knew it. Static again, another scene. This time it was Joan in her classroom, alone. After hours. writing something. The timestamp read March 5th, 2008, 7:14 p.m. The angle showed her at her desk. The camera had clearly been left on, maybe forgotten, maybe on purpose. She placed a grading sheet in a folder, stared at it a long time, then closed it slowly. Then she whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry, Elliot, but they're not going to let you go quietly. I'd rather you hate me and still be here to win." The tape clicked off. The silence afterward was thick. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that wraps around your throat and dares you to speak. Elliot didn't move. His fingers were curled into fists on his thighs. Eyes locked on the static screen. "Everything I thought I knew," he finally said, voice low, "was a lie." John sat beside him, hands folded. Small, still. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "They told me if I didn't flunk you, they'd expel you, and they'd bury the footage. Make sure no college would touch you, no law school, nothing." Elliot turned to her. "So you gave them what they wanted." "I gave them enough," she said. "Enough to satisfy the wolves, but I kept the evidence. I kept your name out of the report, and I told your guidance counselor to disappear with the originals." Elliot blinked. "Wait, Miss Drew? She ghosted mid-semester." "She didn't ghost," Joan said. "She fled. After she told me, she overheard a meeting about fabricating disciplinary charges against you. She wanted no part of it." Elliot sat back, stunned. The betrayal, it wasn't what he thought. The woman he'd painted as the villain for a decade. She'd been standing in front of a fire, shielding him from the worst of it, getting burned all the same. John reached into the shoebox and pulled out a list of names. Administrators, board members. Even Hodges' replacement, the one who claimed the school, just needed a fresh face after the scandal. "They're still in the system," she said. "Some of them moved districts, some got promotions, but none of them were ever held accountable." Elliot stood, pacing now. His thoughts were unraveling at full speed. "I could have fought this back then. I could have exposed them." Joan shook her head. "No, you couldn't. You were a black teenager with no record, no backing, and a system gunning for your silence. They'd have crucified you." Elliot stopped at the window, staring out at the empty quad below. "You chose the lesser knife," he said bitterly. "But it still cut." "I know," she whispered. They stayed there in that dusty old room, two timelines bleeding into each other, regret and resilience filling every crack. Finally, Elliot turned back to her. "Then let's finish what they started." Joan raised an eyebrow. "You still got friends in the district." "Some, but not many." Elliot tapped the VHS tape. "This is enough to start something, but if we want to end it, we need more." Joan nodded slowly. "I kept records," she said, "and names." "Then I'll bring the fire," Elliot replied. "Let's burn this whole thing down." There's a sick kind of power in knowing the truth, especially when the truth's been duct-taped in a filing cabinet for over a decade. And Elliot? He was done playing nice with the lies. After room 214, everything hit different. The VHS tape, the letters, John's confession. It wasn't just his story anymore. It was a thread hanging from a rotting sweater, and the more he pulled, the more everything around it started to unravel. He spent the next week like a man possessed, digging, calling, emailing teachers, former students, even the janitor who used to sneak him extra hall passes. The deeper he went, the darker it got. Records missing from 2006 to 2011. Incident reports misplaced in a basement storage unit that flooded 3 years ago. Elliot found one student, now grown, who remembered being suspended for behavioral disruption in the same year his sister had tried to report a coach for harassment. That sister. She transferred and dropped out a month later. The coach? Promoted to athletic director. Another girl had attempted suicide in 2009. Report said truancy. Her brother had screenshots of her complaints sent to the school counselor. The counselor had left shortly after. The pattern wasn't accidental. It was tactical. Pain buried, shame deleted, lives rearranged to protect the machine. By day 5, Elliot's home office looked like an FBI boardroom. Strings, printouts, sticky notes, tabs open on tabs, redacted reports, anonymous testimonies. The shoebox from Joan had become a war chest. And Joan? She was all in, publicly now. She agreed to give a sworn statement to the press. On record. The news caught fire. Retired teacher comes forward with allegations of cover-up at former school. But that headline didn't even scratch the surface. Elliot knew it was time, so he did what they never expected him to do. He flipped the script, filed a federal complaint with the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, alleging institutional racial bias, academic retaliation, suppression of evidence, administrative conspiracy, and systemic civil rights violation targeting black and marginalized students. The named defendant, Westbridge Unified School District. John wasn't on the complaint. She was the first signature attached to the witness statements. By the time the complaint hit the press, Elliot Reed was no longer just the guy who sued his high school teacher. He was the man dragging a whole damn district into the light. Twitter lit up. Local outlets scrambled for interview. CNN wanted a segment. And inside the superintendent's office, phones rang like fire alarms. They weren't ready because they thought he was just a pissed-off former student with a grudge. What they didn't count on was him becoming the advocate for every kid they tried to erase. And the kicker, that night, an anonymous envelope slid under his door. Inside, a printed email chain dated May 2008. Subject line, containment plan for Reed. CCD, the principal, the board chair, and a name Elliot hadn't seen in a minute, Deputy Superintendent Miles Sutter. The email laid it bare, coded language about removing liability, guiding transcripts, and alternative disciplinary outcomes. They hadn't just failed him, they designed his downfall. Elliot dropped the pages on his desk like a hammer. No more noise, he whispered. Now we go nuclear. It was the kind of morning that felt stitched together by nerves and headlines. Streets outside the federal building were a sea of camera crews, protesters, and wide-eyed interns who'd never seen a scandal bleed out this publicly. Inside, the hearing room was pure tension. Polished wood, microphone, and a wall of press badges dangling like vultures in the gallery. At the witness table sat Joan Keller, hair pulled back, hands shaking but eyes locked on the truth. State your name for the record. Her voice came out soft but sharp enough to cut through years of silence. Joan Keller. And your former role? I was an English teacher at Westbridge High for 32 years. And why are you here today? She paused, not for drama, for breath, for the weight of it. I'm here, she said, because the system taught us how to look away, and I want to teach it what it means to look in. The whole room stilled. Somewhere, a pen dropped. No one moved. Joan went on, about the cover-ups, the directives, the meetings where kids were labeled disruptions for daring to speak up, how she was told to fail Elliot Reed to keep him from dragging the truth into the light. And did you believe that was the right choice? Joan hesitated, voice catching. I believed it was the only one that would keep him breathing. She turned just slightly toward the table behind her, where Elliot sat, sharp suit, shoulders squared, hands folded in front of him, not as a plaintiff, not as a victim, but as the advocate she'd helped him become. The kid she once failed was now the man who'd cracked open a whole district's rot. When it was his turn to speak, Elliot stood slow. No anger, no fire, just focus. My name is Elliot Reed, he said into the mic, and I'm here because silence is an accomplice to injustice. He laid it out. How institutional racism doesn't always scream, it whispers. Through altered records, strategic failures, lost footage. How the school's top brass had built an entire framework of suppression to keep students like him out of the future. And yet, he said, I'm still here. Not because they spared me, but because someone chose the lesser knife. He turned his head to Joan, and I see that now. The room was silent. Not because it was stunned, but because it was listening. The scandal blew up overnight. By the end of the week, 3 district officials resigned. The principal's name was stripped from the football field. 2 administrators were indicted for falsifying student records. And a bill hit the state legislature with Elliot's name unofficially stamped all over it, aimed at mandatory transparency in public school disciplinary actions. But Elliot didn't hang around for the confetti, because 6 months later, he was standing in front of a new class, a small room at a city college downtown. The plaque outside read, Law 101, Legal Ethics and Civil Rights. Elliot walked to the podium, placed his folder down, and looked out at 24 nervous, curious faces. Some looked like he once did, young, uncertain, pissed off at a world that hadn't been kind, and for a second it all circled back. Room 204, the cafeteria protest, the failing grade, the woman who'd become his villain, then his shield. He cleared his throat. All right, he said, eyes locking with the front row. Let's talk about what justice looks like when nobody's watching. And just like that, Elliot Reed, the kid they tried to erase, became the teacher. Because sometimes the people who hurt us weren't trying to destroy us. They were trying to save us from something worse. And sometimes it works.